I'm also joined by my colleagues and senior managers, Neha and Kinjal on this. If you can allow us permission for my colleague Neha to present her screen, please. We'll be very happy. Thanks,
Permission is
Sanjay
there.
and team for joining us.
Uh,
Neha, if you can present the screen, please. And okay, if you can go on full screen mode, thank you. So how can we turn digital risks into a competitive advantage? That's the whole theme. We're going to share some best practices. So thank you so much for having us out here, for allowing us to give a chance on presenting what are the new trends in cybersecurity, what are we seeing, how are countries and companies adopting a data protection regime. We have the new PDPA Act coming in the country. My colleague Neha will share some of those new nuances of that happen. Next slide. Yeah. One trend, and I'll start with a few trends. We've seen what you see out here without the intent of naming a company is, I come from banking and telecom. At one time, banks were mainly attacked and then telecom companies. But today, manufacturing is the new sweet spot for hackers across the world. Why so? Because banks were attacked, they invested in more security. In manufacturing, we thought we are not the not me syndrome. Why would we be attacked? And hackers like water will go for the easiest target. Manufacturing may not have invested in the right way or sufficient enough to protect themselves against an attack. In a bank, if money is lost, money is still insured. It's a loss of reputation. But an attack on a manufacturing company, a retail company, a pharma company, a healthcare company implies that health and safety can be impacted, lives can be lost. And you've seen on the screen uh, every type of company is attacked today. On the trend we see is you attack not for only who you are, but to who you can give access to. Hence, you may be very secure as a company, but you may have given access for connection, for SAP, for physical security or whatever, or the heat sensing, AC sensing, to a third party smaller vendor. So with digital boundaries vanishing across countries and continents, you are attacked not for who you are only, but who you can give access to. So third party security is most important. And hence, during the COVID time, we've seen about a 450% increase in attacks because the perimeter is extending, because the attack surface area has increased as people log in from insecure Wi-Fi laptops, from locations, from home PCs, which all puts a more burden on IT, who are the data custodians to ensure the networks are preserved and they are ensured that people can log in from anywhere, any location. Next trend. Okay, it's a constant landscape. We've seen 53% of companies say that cyber resilience is important. It's no longer just cyber security, it's cyber resilience. I promise you as CXOs, you will be attacked in this lifetime. It's not if, it's only when. But when that happens, A, would you be resilient enough to be able to withstand the cyber attack? Would you know if you are ransomware or God forbid, how would you connect to the hackers? How would you respond? What are the business issues? Today, cyber has moved from a server room to a boardroom issues. How well informed are your board members on cyber security? What are the controls as a board, as senior management you are aspiring to be? IT, as I said, is a data custodian, but cyber is a business issue. And cybersecurity A could be more of a I'm attacked and let me see how I respond to. But a new view is good cybersecurity means good business. Good data privacy means good business. And hence, improved cybersecurity and data privacy means improved business. So, how can cybersecurity be a business differentiator for ourselves as a company? As we get more digital, as we get more IoT, as we use more technology, more increased sophistication, blockchain, how can we ensure how more cloud? How can we ensure we are more secure? Next slide. Next stick. So what are the key priorities that you have to do? First, it's a security built-in approach, not a bolt-on. Most times, security is always as an afterthought. But today, with DevSecOps running in, DevOps running in, security has to be built into the core of the technology solution. You cannot think of security as an afterthought afterwards. With new macro trends coming in, with multi-dimensional marketing, with IoT, with blockchain, with security, which is much more disruptive in nature, with tech coming in, it's all the more imperative for security as a best practice to be conceived. So for your design teams, for your manufacturing teams, when you put a new smart factory, have you thought of that IoT sensor from China or any other Korea, which has a default password, which the whole world will know? How are we securing that smart factories? How are we securing the new businesses we are launching? How are we utilizing the same AI ML feature which the business is utilizing for also combating the security threats? Because there's so many events, how do you distinguish a noise from the actually actionable events? There are tools available. And finally, how are we innovating from cybersecurity? As I mentioned earlier, good security means plain good business. How can we innovate in the designs, in the business which we do for causing much more positive cybersecurity? More innovation means more good business. So these are some of the challenges facing security team members in your team and every other company. And we are here to share some best practices, to share something on privacy laws, to share a few attack scenarios which we have seen in the market, and seeing what are the learnings from such scenarios. Next slide, Neha. Okay, what are the challenges which we face clearly? Newer risks from adoption of emerging tech. Okay, poor employee awareness. Very often we sort of blame our employees. Sometimes I've seen when they haven't done the right thing. But have we as employers really made all the efforts possible to tell employees, contractors, of what is right and what is not really right? Okay, users who utilize in the work from anywhere era, different threats have emerged recently. How do we ensure people are actually aware of that? There's also a danger of just too many IT and tech products being available. You have a cloud and you have hybrid cloud and you have GCP, a Google Cloud, and Amazon Cloud, and Azure Cloud, and you have so many different ITs and servers and databases. It only takes an attacker one successful attempt to get in, while your teams of IT, tech, and security have to defend 100% of all the attacks. And with all these budget constraints happening in the pandemic, how do we know that security actually, which is the core backbone for enabling the business, is actually maintained? Security, as they say, is like the brakes of the car. It does not stop the car. It only allows the car driver to drive faster. Means your business can go faster if the right security controls are put in place. Next slide. Let's learn from a few ransomware incidents of what have happened in the past. Kinjal?
Sure, Burgess.
Go ahead.
So thanks, Burgess, for that. So what we've learned from ransomware incidents in the past that over the past few years, over the past couple of years, I would say, we've seen ransomware incidents causing much more damage to the to organizations across different industries in a large manner. Like if we look at the rise in these impacts that we've seen from 2019 to 20, there was a 311% increase in this particular market. So it just goes on speaking of how much damage these ransomware families have been doing to different organizations. And there would be three specific investigations that we've conducted, three ransomware incidents that we worked on, which we'll be presenting from the next slides. And these are across the major ransomware families, like Egregor, like Mount Locker, and others. And what are our learnings from these different ransomware incidents that we have seen, through which they have literally damaged the entire company, encrypting 90% of their systems across the globe. So Neha, can you go to the next slide, please? So the first one that we saw was a global manufacturing company. It was a global ransomware which was launched against them. It was a targeted attack, wherein we saw that this particular attack took no more than 3 days for the threat actors to come into the organization from the initial attack, initial compromise, till the impact, wherein they exfiltrated the data and encrypted all the systems in the environment. And this happened on 6 different data centers for this particular company, um, encrypting around 80 to 90% of their systems around the globe. So this happened in the Americas, the Africa, the Asia Pacific, Australia, everywhere. The threat actors made use of 35 plus malware and tools, which were there in the organization, and that is how they got access to the environment. They went around laterally from one place to another and dropped their ransomware to encrypt all these systems. The initial compromise that we saw was through a local user ID, which was of a third party user account. And we saw that they did not have any kind of security controls implemented. The users were made to use local systems like their own personal systems to connect to the environment, and connecting to the environment was a single factor authentication. So that is where the entire organization fell down to these attackers. Neha, if you can go to the next slide, we have a detailed description of how this worked. So you can just hit next. I'll go on explaining. So we analyzed around 20 systems. There were 11 systems in Europe, 6 in the US. Africa, there was 1, Hong Kong 1, and Australia 1. Wherein we saw that the attacker is money. Okay, so we have a question: is money paid in such cases? So for the incidents that we investigated, there was no money that was paid to the ransomware families. They got all the data from their backups.
So, Kinjal, yeah, in this case, no money was paid, but we've had a separate incident with one of the pharma companies, where about $2.84 million was sort of asked, and they ended up paying about nearing $500,000 plus. So 60% of the negotiation rate, which happens with the hackers. You have to find out, as Kinjal said, patient zero, blast radius. There are cases across this. I'm not saying it's right to pay, I'm saying wrong to pay. It's every company's policy. But what is the policy for hacker negotiation? How will you talk to the hacker? How will you negotiate? Sometimes negotiation helps you buy time. It's a good time enabler. But do you have the policy? You can't say I'm so and so. You got to have multiple IDs, multiple negotiations, go on the dark net, discuss. And what can really show you now is how the whole negotiation with the company happened while they were talking to the hackers to buy time. They actually were able to recover very well. Back to you, Kinjal.
Right. Thanks. So as Neha is showing up over here, we see that the attackers took access of the systems in America. They tried to launch an exploit. Sorry, they tried to launch an exploit on one of the systems, but that failed. So they jumped onto the other system, exploited the vulnerabilities, and then from there escalated privileges to the administrator account. But the very fact that they were able to log into this environment was because of that third-party user system which they had compromised. In fact, the user himself did not know that his system was ransomware because he was using that system only to connect to this environment. So from there, we saw that the threat actors jumping onto the Europe region, the systems which you see on the top, and to Hong Kong, to Australia, and to Africa. But the interesting point is that they start the attack on 17th of January around 09:34 in the morning, and by 18th of January they have access, or 20th of January they have access to the entire network of this particular organization. And it was on the 6th of February that they came back over here. They saw that nobody had detected them, and they launched the encryption malware over here on this environment. So it just goes on to say speak a lot about about the detection capabilities that we have, about the monitoring capabilities that we have, because many of the antivirus systems, the Defender and such were shut down on these systems. And in fact, the organization had detected Mimikatz, which we see on the server 12 top center. It was detected, but still the team did not really pay heed to the larger attack which was going on in the environment. They just pulled down this particular server and called it a day. So we had several learnings from this one, which we have consolidated, which we'll come to in one of the next slides. Next slide, Neha, please. Yeah. Neeraj, you want to take this one, please?
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So this is another ransomware case study which we worked with, which was for a food company. Now, this is Netwalker. So this is again a ransomware as a service, but this actually was prior to the double extortion events which we are seeing these days. So the one which Kinjal explained was double extortion. That is, about 4 TB of data was removed out of this, and the data was encrypted. In this, there was a very minute amount of data which was more about configuration files, which was exfiltrated, but not the large amount of data like TBs or file system data which is gone out. Now, the attacks, not every attack these days is very complicated, and many times basic cyber hygiene kind of measures which are overlooked by organizations lead to an attack. This attack happened basically over 7 days, and there was impact on 3 data centers. It started off by an end of support system 2003, which was hosted on the internet, but the organizations forgot about it. They thought the data center is decommissioned, it's no longer in use, but the link and the server were fully live. So once the hacker compromised the 2003 system, it was very easy for him to get connected to the primary data center in Bangalore. What happens is that, again, they had next-gen firewalls like most of us, but we consider that internal connectivity is something which is trusted. We trust the connectivity between our data centers, and that is why the next-gen firewall controls like inspection, antivirus, AV, IPS, these are not enabled. And that's what happened over here. Because they weren't enabled, from this compromised data center, they were able to compromise another 2003 server in the primary data center. Now, basically from this, they were able to, once they got access to the 2003, they had administrative access, they were able to have persistence. They created accounts of the environment and started executing Bloodhound, identified the Active Directory, and then executed the ransomware across the environment. This was Netwalker, and again, this is one of those cases where hackers are looking specifically for your backup data, and they've gone and encrypted your backup, because most of the times for quick backup, the syncing of backup systems are on Windows, which is again linked with Active Directory and linked to your already compromised systems. So a key takeaway from this was less than 7 days the whole attack went through, but basic hygiene, things like asset inventory management, firewall configurations, end of support system management weren't there, and which led to the whole encryption in this. Neha, can we go to the next slide, please? Any questions, I'll be happy to take. I'm just maybe a bit faster in the interest of time over here. This is another one which we want to cover, and this is covering a case which is very, very typical to our COVID measures, which is taken, which is work from home. This was with Egregor, again, a very disruptive kind of ransomware family which is out there. This attack initiated from a single factor authentication of VPN. Now, we have all enabled VPN in a hurry and extensively across the organization. But if you don't have two-factor authentications, trying to compromise a single factor ID is comparatively very easy. It can be as simple as a phishing mail. It can be a trivial password. There are multiple vectors. Passwords, employee using passwords on different websites, which are then compromised. So this thing started from a VPN credential, which initiated the attack. They then moved internally, where they brute force from VPN, because VPN gave you like an office. It gives you access to the office premises, almost like that. Somebody walked in with a attacker laptop and connect it to an office network. That's why they were able to do brute force and get access to admin shares. A very interesting thing which we noticed here was that they installed AnyDesk. Now, AnyDesk, TeamViewer, these are tools which are used actively by IT, but they also started being used by hackers because they provided an encrypted link and provide remote control. So this can work as persistence. This can easily work for data exfiltration. So it works both ways for IT and the blue team and even for the attackers. Once the AnyDesk were installed, what we are seeing, antivirus systems, hackers are actively disabling these tools. So it becomes essential that you have proper monitoring, not just seeing the alerts of antivirus, but also their status, their health status, if anything, anyone has tampered with the security tools. Once the antivirus was disabled, they used curb roasting as a technique, which gave them access to tokens, which were then decrypted outside, and then they had access to the passwords. Sorry, this is just a question: how can systems be installed without alerts? So antivirus, there are multiple ways of, and this is we think it's not possible, but this is a common thing which has happened in almost all three attacks and almost all attacks. We install antivirus, but there are different ways of disabling an antivirus. You can do it through MSI, Windows MSI. You can do it from antivirus inbuilt uninstalled programs, or you can stop the services. So it becomes essential that the alerts which are configured are taking all possible measures into consideration. And because antivirus system automatically doesn't send an alert to the SIM saying something has got disabled, unless specific event IDs of antivirus have been configured. So this antivirus shutdown is almost a common factor across all attacks. So moving on, once they got the access to the passwords, lateral movement gives it very easy, because we say we have rules for lateral movement, but configuring rules for lateral movement is actually, it's tougher than said. So moving laterally from a VPN to a Citrix, from a VPN or a Citrix segment to the Active Directory is one of the key measures which all the attackers are taking now, because that becomes the first point of compromise, and then the Active Directory. And once they reach the Active Directory, they push the ransomware through GPO, again, a very key aspect, with scheduled tasks, which actually runs the script and encrypts everything. So this is another example where the hygienes part of cybersecurity is also very important in the sense that we are adding a lot of complexity, but the basic hygiene rules still hold true, and they need to be enforced and checked on regular basis that they are working fine. So Kinjal, over to you, unless anyone has any questions for me, but I'll hand it over to Kinjal to go over the learnings which we've got. We've got a consolidated sheet for that, and we'll be happy to clear any questions.
Thanks, Neeraj. May I next slide, please? Yeah. So between these three ransomware incidents that we saw, there were three things that came out as evident. All these three were SaaS, were running as a SaaS model. They were ransomware as a service, which we've started understanding these threat to our organizations, wherein it is not the actual threat actor who's launching these attacks. They are providing it as a service, like how we've seen IaaS or platform as a service and things of that sort, which increases the threats that we have, and that is an input to our risk assessment and risk mitigation activities. All these three go for double extortion tactics, wherein they exfiltrate the data and encrypt the data so that they have a higher chance of demanding the ransom. And these three are pretty well known. They have a lot of cash under their belt. They have caused a lot of damage in the organizations which they have targeted. And as one of the questions which Sunil asked was about the alerts being sent to the company administrators, while there can be alerts which are being sent, but the major question is there a person sitting behind the desk looking for those alerts or not. And that is one of the major learning that we take from the next slide. Neha, if you can go to the next one, please. So that is one of the major thing that we take as a learning. So logging and monitoring is a major concept which organizations worldwide still do not have it. We do have the logging, but is the logging sufficient for us or not? Even if we have the logging and it is sufficient for us, is there somebody sitting over there looking at all of these logs and alerts and performing the initial analysis to understand if the activity which has been raised as an alarm, is it valid or not? Like just a few days ago, I got a call from one of the clients, and he was getting a lot of alerts from an IT asset management software, and that alert was being raised because there was one hash that was included as part of the IOCs which they had received. So there were people over there who were including these IOCs into their SIM solutions and were looking at the alerts which they were getting. And it is imperative for us to do the same, else we would not be able to understand what is going on in our environment, essentially going into the direction which these three organizations had. So various learnings, enabling multi-factor authentication is a prime thing for all administrator accounts and for all external users connecting to our environment. Patching, updating, another major thing, segregation of the network, segregation of duties, standardizing all the configurations. These are basic things. We can have like all the big solutions that we require. But at the end of the day, if we do not have the configurations in place, if we do not have the patching in place, if we do not have proper logging and monitoring, we wouldn't be able to secure our environment. Yeah. Any questions, or can we move on to the privacy part? Sure. I think we can move ahead, Neha.
Just 1 second. Let's hold on out here. Thank you, Neeraj and Kinjal. So Sanjay and team, basically we were utilizing the case study approach instead of just giving a theory approach of doing this or doing that. This follows a live case study which the team has themselves worked on. All this happened during pandemic times. The three organizations, they were crippled. And using this case study approach, we actually utilize the opportunity out here to tell you what's a good practice, which companies have sometimes painfully learned, which you can avoid and learn from somebody else's mistakes. So happy to get any questions answered before we move to the next topic on data privacy and the upcoming PDPA privacy law. Any questions? We'll be happy to respond to that.
Burgess, I think I have 2 questions.
Yeah. I've seen one question on SAP data. Yeah, we've seen cases of companies where completely SAP or ERP data has been encrypted. If the default feature of encryption has not been turned on, which now is also coming in a few applications. But yeah, we've heard of companies who've lost complete production. There's a separate question, which is worm backup right once. That's more of a comment, I believe. Is there any other question? How can backup data be protected from such systems? So good backup policies have 3 backups, 2 of different kinds, media, and 1 should be offline or cloud. Backup data should be also encrypted by default, which is now a good feature coming in most advanced backup solutions, because the hackers will be like use APTs, they'll go below the radar, they will encrypt your main application and the backups, and then you'll have useless backups which can't utilize it. So there are ways of utilizing it. Backup restoration also has to be checked at routine frequencies. Any other questions, Sanjay?
Just one question, Mr. Cooper. Is there a system where you have the initial boundaries which once cracked, and once the active files are reached, it seems that you can then disseminate and populate the entirety of the system? Is there a case where you can actually slice up the system and make sub boundaries so that a hacker will need to crack each one of them to go from one to another? I'm saying it in a way.
It's called defense in depth, which is what the approach follows. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
to a large extent, because you always have the external perimeters and then you have the internal perimeters and you have detection devices. What is the other thing what you do is actually you have something called deception technologies, which today is a great attraction. It's a system which mimics a very, very important SAP. Let's say it will be exact replica of your SAP system OS database, but it will actually be a honeypot deception technology. So the moment the attacker tries to connect to it, tries to encrypt it, tries to figure data, it does not stop the hacker. It actually allows the hacker. It studies the hacker patterns, studies the patient zero from where the hackers come in, how many of the systems he's infected. So there are deception technologies available, which is also a part of defense in depth, which can track the hacker as he does lateral movement, as he comes in multiple times. What is his pattern? Is he using one IP or multiple IPs? What signatures is he using for attack? What are the tools he's using to attack and compromise systems? So defense in depth is an approach. Most companies utilize it successfully to be able to detect, protect, and then take corrective actions. Okay, considering time, we should move on to the next section on data privacy. Neha.
So there is one question, in fact, two questions, if we can just look at them.
Yeah, so
one is
how a cloud, I can read that.
Yeah.
A cloud just means somebody at a data center. So there's GCP cloud or AWS or Azure. Cloud does not mean security by default. You have to pay money and effort to enable it and then detect and monitor on it. So just because it's a cloud doesn't mean security is there. It means security features are available by default. You have to pay money to turn it on. You have to pay money to protect it, detect it. The feature is there. It's a soft turn on feature, but it doesn't mean by default it's there. So are the cloud secure? Yes, they're secure if you have opted for security features, configuration, monitoring, detection of. All right. Neha, you can go on the next slides now.
Sure, Burgess.
Thank you.
So after this, we are just going to speak about data privacy. And before we get to the Indian aspect of it, we will just, briefly speak about what are the laws. So I think in the last 2.5 years, since GDPR has come up, we have seen that multiple geographies, across the globe have started coming up with their, versions of the law and how they talk about, what kind of laws are we talking about, or although the principles, the soul of all the laws remain the same. However, a lot of these laws are very different in terms of coverage, in terms of definitions of personal information, in terms of how they define cross-border transfers. However, one thing that we see across the globe is that all of the countries, all of the businesses are very concerned about data protection and privacy as a concept. This is a trend that we have seen across the globe. Now coming to the Indian, to the Indian context of it, we have seen that we have the Indian PDPB, which is coming up right now, and it's a draft version that we already have in place at the moment, and companies are preparing themselves to be ready of it, to understand what the law talks about, or what the law consists of. So if we just have to take a brief overview of what this law talks about, then in a nutshell, this law is very, very similar to what we have as a part of GDPR, right? So this law again will talk about what are the penalties. GDPR only talks about the penalties in terms of fines. We also have penalties in terms of criminal offenses with an imprisonment time of about 3 years. The definition of personal information is also very different in case of GDPR and in case of PDPB. How it's different is that most laws across the globe do not identify financial information. Things like in India, we have we have an individual PAN card, we have bank account numbers. These set of information are recognized as personal information. However, in the Indian context, this information is recognized as sensitive personal information. right? So it is very, very important for us as companies to look at this, because although we may be a, you know, a B2B business, or we may have an arm that is completely B2B, or some cases B2C, but financial details are something that every company will collect for their employees and for their vendors, contractors, consultants, third parties working with them. So all of these details will classify under the umbrella of sensitive personal data. Another very important aspect of sensitive personal information in the Indian context is our Aadhaar card. Now, that piece of information all of us as individuals share with n number of entities. However, this law classifies it as sensitive personal information, which means any body corporate that is collecting this information has a sole, a sole right to understand or ensure that this information is protected. They are clearly defining the purpose for this information, purpose of usage of this. So if someone has collected your Aadhaar card only as a POI or a POA, which is proof of identity or proof of address, and that's the purpose that you have consented for as an individual, that's the only way in which that data can be used. Okay, so right now, if you are, if you're giving your information, you do not have a clarity on what purposes. However, after this law comes into place, all body corporates need to clearly list down what could be a lawful purpose, and these purposes should be lawful. It should not be that it is a purpose that the company thought that for for business purposes we need it. So this is a very a very ambiguous way of writing it, that we need it for business purposes. But what exactly are you going to use this data for? That is something that as a body corporate we need to define. Also, when this consent has been taken, this consent needs to be taken by every from every individual. This individual could be your employee. This individual could be your vendor. And why I'm saying vendors is because vendors are proprietors in a lot of cases. Consultants are individuals whose information we collect, and we do need to take an explicit consent where they a tick in a box, or a consent saying I consent, or some affirmative action in the way of consenting to say that yes, you are collecting my data and this is how you can use it. Right? A company also needs to have a proper retention and disposal policy. And why this becomes very important for Indian companies per se is because in our experience, we have seen that multiple companies have never deleted any data. So since the inception of, there are companies that are 100 years old, and they still have all of the data that since the time of inception. Yeah, but this law says that for every personal information that you need to retain, you need to have a purpose and you need to have a guideline. Now, there are laws of land, like, we have a law of land that says that any company needs to maintain that HR data for a period of 7 years. Now, that is something that will still, be over this law. So that is, you can say that the law of land says 7 years, so we need to keep it. But that reason or that purpose needs to be defined. And our retention and disposal policy need to be around that. Also, what we need to do is we need to appoint a grievance officer, or there has to be one individual or a team responsible to ensure that in case if we receive any, any complaints, any rights, any questions with respect to personal information that is getting collected, then this query or this grievance is resolved in a period of 30 days. Yes, if there is a valid reason as to why we cannot find where this information is or when we collected it, all of that, a proper justification can be provided to the individual. However, a 30-day period time detail has to be there, that by when are we addressing it. So this is in a nutshell that the law talks about. There are a lot of other privacy principles that we will just quickly go through. This is just a little about, and I'm just skipping a few slides just in the interest of time. So who could be our, people who we collect information of? Like I mentioned, it could be contacts, it could be marketing contacts, it could be leads we get as a result of seminars, or any webinars that we can conduct, could be credit card information. So all of this set of information is something that we collect in the course of our business. These, the companies that collect data, the law classifies them as data fiduciaries, which are nothing but companies that decide that what is going to be the purpose of collection of information. So for all employees, the company that has employed them is a data fiduciary, because that company decides that person A is going to be my employee, and I am going to collect, these 10 details about him because I need them for the purpose of employment, or I need them for the purpose of background verification, or I need them to need this information to check any criminal background the person may have. So all of these, so for any individual who's an employee, the company that employs the individual becomes a data fiduciary. But we also outsource a lot of our work to data processors. So in that case, say for example, if we have an insurance service provider, right, which are companies that are third parties, or could be background verification providers, again third parties, or could be IT companies that maybe manage our backup, or look at housekeeping, and all of these companies. And we may collect individual information from these companies also. So these companies become our data processors. And in case if these companies are going to process any data from our behalf, like for example, now housekeeping is not going to process any data on your behalf, but background verification is going to use the data of the individual to actually find out the background details of the individual. So we need to ensure that we have proper clauses and contracts in place with these data processors to ensure that if there is any data leakage that happens at their end, it is not just us as data fiduciaries who are responsible, but they are equally responsible. Yes, so there are a lot of contracts and clauses and additional clauses that we need to sign with companies, especially with the ones wherein we are sharing a lot of information, or could be another use case, could be companies who have access to our systems, or access to information or personal information on our systems. And the third player is the third party, which is nothing but someone who's just processing a little bit of data for you, but you still need to ensure that there is a back-to-back contract in terms of clauses and confidentiality and data protection between the data fiduciary, the data processor, and the third party. Okay. So we did discuss about the variations of personal information. Now the Indian Act calls this personal information and sensitive personal information, but there are other laws across the globe which will call it in a different manner, like the HIPAA calls it PHI, which is only protected health information, which is only applicable to health information of individuals also. And the way the personal information is categorized is also varies from law to law. Like I said, in the Indian context, in fact, the government has also described something called as critical data. They have not given out a definition of something called critical data at the moment. However, they've said that everything that gets classified under the window of critical data will be something that will need to be localized, and not something that you will be able to send overseas or even have a copy overseas. However, they have not defined the term critical data as of now, but we are awaiting for that to get defined in the future, the versions of the law that will come out. Moving on. Let's just see, we've just tried to, put it that how do we think that this law is going to be applicable to you? So it could be that, we collect personal information of employees, customers, vendors. We've spoken about this, or any kind of disclosure of information that happens to third parties, in case there is any cross-border transfer. And cross-border transfer is both ways. If any data is going from India to outside, or if any data is coming from outside to India. In that case, it's not just PDPB, but the privacy law of the country that we are dealing with may also be applicable to us. Yeah, so that is also something that we need to take into consideration. Right now, we are just speaking about PDPB because it's the law of India and we are speaking about it. However, when we are speaking about data privacy as a concept, and if we are speaking about data flows, then it is not just restricted to data flows within the country, but if there are cross-border transfers, there are other laws that we just looked at in the map. That is also something that we need to look at. Yes, yes, sir. I can see someone's hand up.
What I wanted to ask was, one of our companies is CSC, which is the power distribution business in Calcutta. Now they have a mass of data of all the consumers they supply electricity to. Now we have another company called Spencer's, which is in retail. Now, if we use the data which we have in our power utility company in CSC and have it used by Spencer's to send messages of deals, etc., would that be misutilization of the Act?
So, sir, right now, as we speak, the current law in India does not actually speak about, data of such kind in detail. However, after PDPB, it is that you need to have an explicit consent from the individual that you will be sharing it with multiple parties.
Yeah, two parts. One, by law, you may not have, but as per good practices of data privacy, it's not a good thing to do.
Yes.
Because sooner or later, you will have the privacy law. And again, as I said, one is what you can't do by law, but as a good practice principle for data privacy, that's not good for taking it for one reason and using something else for which the person has not consented to. In fact, NEA has been working for one of India's largest conglomerates who were making a super app for getting tickets, insurance, hotels, and merchandise, and multiple other paraphernalia from one group. So entire privacy onboarding principles, how to get what policies, what banners, what cookies, go green plan. You can do it, but there are ways of ensuring that you are on the right side of the law. Happy to have a case study approach, which NEA has done for one of the largest Indian conglomerates for their super app. But yeah, you just utilizing it by itself may or may not be a law issue, but clearly an ethics from a data privacy gap principles. So all the laws of the world are based on universal data privacy gap principles, which constituents against. So you have to have an individual opt-in for each type or have ways of going around that. Yeah, back to you.
Sure, Burgess. So like Burgess mentioned, sir, what we say is that, our job is to enable businesses to use this in the most ethical manner and still be compliant to laws. So in case if there is a use case where you want to use such data for any other, sister companies or sister concerns or affiliates, then you need to identify the purpose for which this information is used and clearly call it out in the where you are collecting this or the source of this information from the customer. If you can call it out and the customer consents to it, then there is no problem in using this data.
Sure. So ways to enable this in the right ways. Okay, Neha, quickly, I think we have few minutes left. Go ahead.
Yeah. So we have a small, a small questionnaire here that when you are collecting data, what are the kind of questions that you can ask yourself? So are we collecting data in line with the privacy principles? Do we need a privacy notice? Because a customer, the purpose of identifying, what is the data going to be used for? Is the data going to be transferred cross-border? Are we going to share it with any third parties? All of these things are, requisite components of a privacy notice that we usually provide at the source of collection of information. Now, this source could be something as basic as an employment letter, or it could be something like our website, or it could be something like a mobile app. So where you're providing this notice and you are taking an explicit consent of the data subject, or as PDPB calls it, data principal, who is nothing but the individual whose information we are collecting. So the first question is that. The second question is, are we authorized to process this information? Are we have the purposes defined by us? Can we process the information for that? So say, for example, if you've not mentioned that you're going to do any user profiling or analytics on that data, then can you still go ahead with it or not? That is something that we need to ask ourselves. And then do we have measures in place before sharing this with any other department or a third party or NDAs? Because there are a lot of contractual clauses that not only mandate what the third party or the data processor needs to keep in check in terms of privacy, but also in terms of information security, what they need to do. So how do they need to ensure that this data this data is kept secure, this data is not leaked out, because in case, even if the data gets leaked out from your data processor's end, the data controller is still responsible to, still accountable for holding this data. Yes, sir.
Given the time constraints, we are sort of okay with the deck. Any questions, Sanjay?
Yeah, Burgess, I had a chance a couple of years back when this was still in the draft phase to work through CII. And two things probably I just want to call out, and if that is right or wrong, you will correct me. One was sensitive personal data in no ways would leave the Indian borders. And second is, if government wanted information from data fiduciaries, they have to ensure that it is at an aggregated form sent to the government.
Can you comment on that?
Still
in the new draft? We haven't seen the new draft as yet.
So, sir, depends. Like I said, critical data definition is still awaited from the government. They've not come up with the definition of critical data, so we all need to see. However, what we anticipate basis our experience is that critical data will be something related to banking information, and the the information which will be more prevalent to RBI or financial sector, which will be asked to localize. For sensitive personal information, they have currently said that we still need to maintain a copy of that data in India. However, another copy of that data can reside abroad. But it cannot be the case that this sensitive personal information is only residing abroad and it's not there in India. For personal information, just personal information, there is no segregation on data localization at the moment.
So many of these laws won't apply to government entities like Aadhaar. That's again a potential discussion topic. So the government themselves may be exempt from some of these.
No, because there has been counter activism saying that Department A, and this is the government, would want data for a purpose Y, but that same data could then be used internally in Department B and used in a way which is not defined earlier when that data was asked of from the respective data collectors or data processors.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're good with today's presentation. Neha, anything else you'd like to show? Or
no, but just we have a few slides, but I think in the interest of time, I think I've covered most of the stuff earlier. But it's
we'll send the deck anyways to everyone.
Yes.
I hope you enjoyed today's session. It was a mix of technical, hardcore, ransomware, cyber for the techies, and with Neha's slide on with Kinjal and Neeraj there, and with Neha giving us a great thing on process and privacy. So for both a case study based approach with questions in the end. Happy if you want any questions, we could be reached, or if you have any clarifications. So thank you so much, Sunil. Appreciate that.